So while AI isn't necessarily new, this broad application and excitement in the market is new, but it is a solution in many orgs, a solution searching for a problem. And so we have loads of inefficiencies in that. The other, we still stink at knowing what the most important things to do are. So now we've got problem one, which is AI as a solution searching for problems, and then we stink at identifying problems. Well, what can we do? If we're thinking about how I might take wonderful solutions, because AI is not just a solution, it's many things. How are y'all helping map out, problem finding and being that guide on the the potentials here, the right potentials?
As a consultant, worked with a lot of companies, and so we do a lot of interviewing, and a lot of the questions are, what are your pain points? What's your workflow? What is the worst part of your job? What's the favorite part of your job? You start to hear what is the I really wish I knew this information, or it's really hard when I have to get this. Or we'll say, if you had a magic ball that could tell you something in the future, what is that you want to know? We start to find out what are the things that are actually they think about in their job, and not I saw there was, Gen AI doing this, and maybe I could have a chatbot. And it's like, no, don't think about Gen AI. Don't think about a chatbot. Think about your job. What do you do every day? What's hard about it? What do you like about it? What do you wish you knew? And just starting to have those kinds of interviews, those kinds of questions. We'll do that with multiple people, sometimes across different departments. And you can start to find themes within job functions. You can find themes across the organization of everyone has trouble doing this, or this role has a bigger struggle understanding something than another role, and you really start to find where should this AI capability sit, or maybe what are their priorities.
Julia, you've helped people frame things and try to figure out where best to focus time, the scarcest of all resources.
Yeah, going back to the first point that AI is a data capability, and AI strategy is approach to AI strategy is an approach to data capability strategy. And the first set of questions, in addition to the one that Keatra just went through, is actually I'd like to ask, what are your goals for this year? So if I talk to business people, how are you going to be judged? What are your objectives? What do you have in your goal, objectives for a year? How are you going to be judged at the end of the year? What are you trying to achieve? And I don't even go what do you need specifically from data? It's more what do you need to have in place to be able to achieve it? What are you trying to build? And then if you have enough of those, very similar approach to what Keatra said, but anchored into the business objectives of the company and anchored into how this company actually makes money. So that's really, really important to understand how the company makes money, what are their immediate objectives. And then you get to the list of capabilities that support at least more than one of those objectives that are important to the business this year and within the next 2-5 years, depending on how, what their planning cycle is. But that's actually the way I found finding what's important, because sometimes when you ask and when I get engaged, the person who engages me thinks this is more important. And as you have those conversations, something else completely different pops up that enables multiple things to happen.
I remember one of the funniest times I got humbled by a client. I was working with a large national grocery retailer and was talking to them about their certain capabilities. And I was probably coming across a little too harsh. And one of the guys became friends with him, but he looked at me, he's like, Sid, remember, we do groceries, right? Like we're here for the customer experience and what they experience in the store. So we can be good at that later. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. That's fair.
To add to that a little bit, and maybe look at the other side of the equation, right, is that you also want to avoid the squeakiest wheel gets the oil problem, right? The loudest person who's able to make that connection of this business value is really important to our business, right? You don't want that to overshadow what's actually best for the business. And one of the key areas that we see extremely successful organizations kind of get away from some of those problems, or at least help guide them and direct them, is with some processes, right? Processes around things like solution intake processes, so that you can track the business value and track the problems that are being solved. Because sometimes maybe somebody else is already solving some other problems, so you should actually be working on this wheel because it's just a super easy thing that provides a good amount of business value, as opposed to this really, really hard thing that provides, a ton of business value, right? but maybe they're just a little bit quieter. So how do you make sure that those things are available in the organization? You have to be measuring it, right? We keep going back to this. I mean, we're data people. We have to go back to it, right? So making sure that you're measuring that again, so that, that squeakiest wheel problem doesn't crop up and just be a political nightmare.
Yeah. We have a really good question from one of our attendees. How can you tell when another part of the org is maturing enough to take ownership? Like, what are some ways that you can tell that you can start to pivot from everything being centralized to groups, some of your spokes taking on more capability? So
what came to mind was your data governance, your regulations, your standardization. If everyone is starting to have a centralized view of this is how we manage data, this is the squeaky wheel problem, I like that, Ron. Do we have a solution intake? Are we tracking tracking projects, tracking how they're impacting KPIs? If you're having a good way of measuring products, if you have good data standardization and governance policies, and everyone is following them, then I think you can start to move away from, we have this one central unit that controls everything, to start to decentralize and give units some more autonomy to move within themselves and start to self-organize and develop out.
One thing I would say in that case, to answer it rightly, is like since you can do 1 or 2 projects for them, the way I had done it previous when I was leading innovation, and then you kind of transition out to make sure the next either iterations or enhancements to those organizations are being done, and you being an advisor there. You're not being actively working on those projects, but you monitor and KPI measure that they are adhering to the playbook or they're in the architecture standards. And if they are really doing well, the outcomes are not having issues, I think they should be considered as scoring high on that maturity level.
Yeah.
And you're trying to transition back to them. And this is worked out pretty well. Where you transition from innovation or new technology stuff to an active operations or continuing work on that space.
Yeah.
I want to touch on this point of maturity levels and measuring them, because I don't think we directly answered that question. Mm-hmm. There's 1,000 different maturity frameworks out there, right?
Yeah.
There are maturity matrices. There's a ton of them to base off of CMMI data maturity matrices. Every major organization and vendor has their own flavor of these things. And you probably should too at every organization. They can be super, super lightweight and easy to do, 10-minute type of things per data domain. And that's the key piece, per data domain, right? You don't have organizational data maturity. You have data domain data maturity.
I love to tell people all models are wrong. Some are useful. And that includes like your operating models, right? So take everything, knowing that there is probably a gilded hubris as you go into each one of them. And so look at it, use it. To me, one of the most important things that they do is we establish a lexicon. So as y'all, like Shroboto, Keatra, those y'all were all talking about improvements. Well, how do I know if one department's using a different model or not using anything, right? So establishing a lexicon is very important at the beginning, that shared understanding across the org.
So far, people have discussed the correct answer to the question about measurement and organizations, and what I think all of us on this call, I think all of us are generally good practitioners of the art, would put forward. Mm-hmm. One thing I've noticed though at many companies, and from startups to enterprises, Fortune 500 all the way down, is in this Gen AI gold rush that's happening right now, there's been a distortion, if you will, of value. Mm. I completely agree that we should be targeting things with Gen AI, for example, that are valuable. But one, venture capitalists on the startup end of the spectrum, they are demanding Gen AI go into products, whether it be there or not. That you often now can't get funding for a lot of things in the AI space unless it's Gen AI. So therefore, you're forced to shoot, not because it's necessarily valuable, it may not be, but because you need VC funding to grow your product. So the value is inherently there. It's distorted, right? It's not value for the customer. It's just value for you to get funding or money. On the enterprise scale, I've seen both my own customers and other customers, the organizational goal to Julia's point earlier on for the year is Gen AI. That is the goal. Not we want to grow X by 15%. We want to, service our customers better. We want to, reduce churn by X. No actual measurable business metrics. It's Gen AI is the business goal. Yeah. That's going to be that's typically a very expensive mistake. So I think we should just all acknowledge that that there is currently a market distortion going on with Gen AI that deviates heavily from, I think, and I see some businesses who are very experienced, very smart people making this mistake right now. People that are decades my senior, who I've got massive respect for and what they've done, who are just saying, "Yep, Gen AI." So I just want to call out the elephant in the room there and acknowledge it, whilst also acknowledging that that is not necessarily the right thing to do, and that what people here have said is the right thing to do. So if you're listening and that's what you're doing, please listen to Keatra, Julia, Subroto, Ron about what you should be doing instead.
AI is not the end, it's the means. Except that very few technology companies where it is in fact the end, but for majority of companies out there, it's the means, it's not the end.
I think the key thing is, as leave very important point for all our listeners here, the thing is from a hype cycle to a value cycle is where the transition is going to happen. The Gen AI is because the board is telling that, or the people are in that direction, where everybody wants to go to Gen AI, right? I think where the value cycle is more important, we transition out, and we are putting up the one important part for every organization is, even though you are saying, how do you build the right AI capability, is first of all, obviously the monitoring tools, ethical, and then the security part of it is another important point we should be all discussing it. And I have seen people who are given that's why again the centralized concept comes into play. Like you are giving the capabilities, and if you are not monitoring how they are using the data to upload to the models, which is a closed door models, you are letting your company data being out. So if you don't have the right security framework around it, so that if it either through a CASB or some kind of a monitoring ways, you have make sure that as an organization you have those boundaries in place before they're really being capable of doing their own activities, and then making sure again the value cycle is very important there.